All right, kicking off another episode of Zen and Callsigns. And my next guest is Mark Dawes. Sir, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. My pleasure.
Well, thank you, sir. You caught my eye with the, I think it's, I don't know if you've coined this term, but the quantum mind. Is that correct? I don't know. Did you coin that? Because I feel like that is a very apt term for you and the information you share.
Yeah, I called it quantum thinking because that
Yeah.
was the name of the book that I wrote. But yeah, it's a mix of many things. You know, science, modern science, ancient scripture, Buddhism primarily is what I lean towards, and it's
Yeah.
just been an interesting journey in bringing that all together. Really.
I love it. Well, would you start off with a little bit of your background? So maybe where you're from, kind of way back when.
Yeah. Well, I was born in London in 1960, which makes me 64 now, and
Yep.
I had a great family life. We weren't very rich. You know, we didn't have a lot of money, but we were happy. I could have done a lot better at school, but I was a bit of a rogue, if I'm being honest. I always liked to be with the boys doing things we shouldn't be doing. And then when I was 16, I joined the Royal Navy, and that was an eye opener in terms of discipline. And I just gelled with it. I loved it. I loved the values of the service. I loved the lifestyle. And I progressed quite quickly through the ranks. I ended up as a petty officer, which is equivalent to like a staff sergeant when I was about 24, I think it was.
Yeah.
And then they offered me a commission to be a pilot, which interestingly, I didn't want to be. I didn't want to be an officer. But they gave me a fantastic deal, which was, look, your pension will carry over. If you don't like it, we'll put you back wherever you want to go. So I thought, well, I've got nothing to lose. So I went through the flying training. My heart wasn't really in it, so I failed pilot training. And then I was offered the chance of being an observer, like a navigator. And I did that,
Yep.
and I quite enjoyed that, to be honest. But then I got a letter from the Navy saying that I was no longer on a pensionable career, which was something that wasn't agreed. Otherwise, it would have been no point me becoming an officer, because I could have stayed in the ranks and ended up as a warrant officer first class quite easily by the time I'd left. So I challenged that, and basically they said, no, do another 6 years and we'll reconsider. And I thought, no. And it just, the thing about the Navy I loved was the values, the camaraderie, the whole lifestyle. And when they did that, it was as if they'd gone back on their word, and I felt betrayed.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I suppose a fit of anger, I resigned my commission and walked out the door. I
How
was
old were you then?
then I was 28.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'd done
Gotcha.
12 years service. Yeah, I was £4,500 in debt and nowhere to live. So I went back to London, stayed in a bedsit. My family helped me a little bit. And it
Do
was,
you have a GI Bill? That's like kind of the if you serve a certain amount of time, you get to go to schools. Is there anything like that there in the UK for you?
if you serve a bit of time, you get what, sorry?
So if you serve 4 years, I believe in the military in the U.S., you get 4 years of a college paid for to some degree
Really?
about that.
Yeah, we don't get anything like that.
No, all
No,
right.
you seem like you guys got a good deal. Yeah.
Yeah,
So I was broke, I was miserable,
yeah,
I was sad, but I worked hard and I grafted, and I ended up getting a job for Apple Computer. I did very well at that, became the second highest paid consultant in the UK. But there was something about shifting boxes that just really didn't resonate with who I was. So
yeah.
I decided to buy a little business, and I thought because I was a good salesman, I'd make a good businessman, and I was wrong. I was completely wrong. I ended up £80,000 in debt, and by this stage, I was married. We had one child, and I went into a deep depression. If I'm being absolutely honest, I felt like a failure, and I've always been brought up to be a man, and stole the virtues of what men do, and not
Yes.
being the main breadwinner, and literally getting the family into debt where we were under threat of having our home repossessed. I got to a point where I thought, right, I'm just going to commit suicide. The world will be better off without me. The family will be better off without me. And there was a tree in my back garden, and I remember even contemplating how I was going to do it, hang a rope over the tree, etc. And then a friend of ours turned up, and he said, look, read this book. And I can't remember the name of the book for the love of me. But he said, if you read this book and at the end of it you still want to do it, I'll help you commit suicide. So I thought, there's a deal.
Yeah.
So I read this
Did
book.
you, was he a mentor of yours, or how did he know that you were kind of feeling that way?
We knew him. He was a family friend. He was a
Okay.
very successful businnman. He was a multimillionaire. And he gave me this book and I read it. And there was just something that jumped out at me, which said that your mind has the power to create everything. And wherever you
Yes.
are now is as a result of the way you choose to think. And it was that one thing that caught me. And I thought, right. So I started investing money I didn't have in self-help books and reading literally everything I could. And my mindset started to change. And I thought, right, I'm gonna start another business. And I actually went first and foremost. I got a job as a prison officer, and I worked as a prison officer, and I became a hostage negotiator. And then I thought, right, I'm going to start a training company. So I started a training company, and it was hard work, but it became very successful. And we were considered to be one of the leading experts in what we did in our field. And, I enjoyed it. It was great. But there came a point where the anger I had was getting to a situation where the slightest thing would set me off. So a friend of mine took me to a party, which I didn't want to go to, actually. And he said, I'll take you to a party. I said, I don't want to go. I'll end up in a fight. And he said, no, you'll be fine. So I went begrudgingly. And there was people there drinking and eating and dancing and doing whatever. And I looked around the room, and in the corner was a Buddhist monk in his full robes. And
Wow.
I thought, well, this is a bit strange. And my friend said, he's for you. I brought him for you. So I went and sat with this monk. And he said, you're the angry man. And I said, no, I'm not angry. And he kicked me with his little sandal feet in my shin. And I said, you kicked me. He said, who kicked you? I said, you. He said, when? I said, just now. He said, did it hurt? I said, no. He said, well, don't worry about it. It's gone. It's finished. And he carried on talking to me. I looked at my friend and he said, just listen to the man. He said, he's come for you. So he continued to talk. And it was quite interesting, the things he was saying. But then he kicked me a second time. And I said, you've kicked me. He said, who? I said, you did. He said, when? I said, just now. He said, did it hurt? I said, no. He said, then don't worry about it. And continued to talk. And I was completely confused. And he did it a third time. And I said, look, you kicked me a third time. And he said, who? I said, you. He said, when? I said, just now. He said, did it hurt? I said, no. He said, don't worry about it. I said, look, I'm ever so sorry, monk or not, if you kick me one more time, I'm going to put you on your backside. And he said, oh, you are the angry man. And he just got up and he gave me a piece of paper with an address on it. And he said, you come here 2 times a week to see me. And I said, no. And he said, you will. He said, you have to come. And my friend said, oh, I'm going to make sure he comes. So on the first allotted Tuesday, I arrived at this big temple and got there. I walked up to the door and I went to press the doorbell and I couldn't do it. Something was stopping me doing it. And he opened the door and he said, that's really interesting. He said, that doorbell doesn't work for people that don't press it. He said, come in. So I went in, we had tea, and he started to talk to me about meditation and quantum physics and all this stuff that I had no idea of. And he said, would you like to come into the meditation hall and meditate with me? And I said, no, thank you. He said, why? I said, it's weird. He said, what's weird about it? I said, well, you're all like, I said, it's for people that wear open-toed sandals and dance around trees in the forest. I said, that's not me. I said, I'm an ex-serviceman. And he said, but you breathe, don't you? I said, yes. He said, well, come and breathe with me. So I thought, I'd just keep him happy. So I went to the meditation hall and he took me through a breathing exercise, which was a meditative exercise. And at the end of it, he said, how do you feel? And I said, I feel nice. I feel quite relaxed. He said, that's all it is. Now you come twice a week. And I enjoyed it. So that was the start of my journey, if you like, into that.
Yeah.
And then with the training company, I invested in myself. I went and did Neuro-Linguistic programming, NLP training, became a coach in that field, became a qualified cognitive hypnotherapist. But that was all great. But there was all the bigger questions that needed answering. So I started to look more into quantum mechanics and quantum physics, all through self-study. I'm not an educated man by a long shot. And then as I was reading on the science of quantum entanglement and quantum physics and all this other wonderful stuff, it kept leading me back to ancient scripture because they
Yeah,
reference it.
exactly.
So I'd go and get
Yep.
the book and I'd read it and I'd go and talk to a monk, and it it just converged. It all came together and it all made sense. There wasn't an enlightenment moment. It was years and years of study, but the stuff that we're discovering now has been spoken about for thousands and thousands of years. You know,
Exactly.
and it's as if the universe or God or Brahman, whatever you want to call it, is allowing us to see the laws by which creation is happening when we're ready to see them. And that, and that's been my journey really. And now I meditate every day without fail, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day, and my whole life has completely changed. It's brought me into a level of personal conscious awareness that is so far removed from what I did when I was in the military. That friends of mine in the military, when I tell them I meditate, they look at me as if I would have looked at me 20, 30 years ago. They think I've lost the plot. So that's sort of a brief synopsis of where I am, I suppose.
Okay, well, that was super interesting. I wish I had a good story like that of my Zen journey, and it's more of just I listen to a lot of Alan Watts, and that's probably why how to some degree why I named this podcast Zen and Call Signs, and among other things. But I've always found it fascinating as well of the connection between consciousness, the thousands of years of history, Buddha, Jesus, and all of these, high level players. They superposition themselves either into these places, these situations to make an incredible impact, and they're just one person. And I think that that's that quantum thinking, and it's that entangled mind that is maybe prescient and but also doesn't know anything, and it's an interesting balance. But if you could, you can maybe give everybody a little bit of background on NLP, because that's very fascinating. I'm only very like novice understand that, but because I think that's an interesting facet of how do you use language. Would you riff on that for a bit?
Yeah, well, NLP stands for Neuro-Linguistic Programming, which neuro obviously relates to the brain, linguistic relates to language, and it's how our language can program our brain in the sort of briefest sense of the word. But what Richard Bandler, who's one of the co-founders of NLP, he was the guy I trained with, what he taught is that every thought has a structure, and it's made up of different submodalities, so color, movement, sound, these sort of things. And that's how we differentiate between a good thought and a bad thought. And what his motivation was that a lot of psychiatry and psychology at the time was focusing on what people were doing wrong, or their ailments, or their illnesses, or their depressions. And what Bandler and Grinder, the two founders of NLP, did was they looked at what people were doing right and got this distinction between the way people think differently between doing something well and doing something not so well, or having an illness or a disease. And the thing which fascinated me about NLP was that Bandler and Grinder showed how people who've had phobias, for example, who may have had them for years, or been depressed for decades, who were being medicated by the medical society, he could break that phobia in 45 minutes. And I thought, this is unbelievable. I've got to learn to
Right.
do that. And my motivation for that was when we ran the training company, we'd have a lot of people come on courses to train with us. And the number one problem that people were facing was anxiety. They would come on the
Right.
course and worry about the course. In fact, we even had two special forces or ex-special forces guys turn up, and I noticed their feet were tapping under the desks. So I asked them, is something concerning you? And they said, yeah, is there an exam? I said, yes, there is. They said, we're off. We're not doing this. And when I found out
Yeah.
who they were, it sort of amazed me. But they'd had a previous experience with another training provider that had basically treated them not very well. So my motivation in learning NLP was to help people get over anxiety so they could go and do the courses and get the qualifications they needed without worrying about it. And it was quite strange actually, because we'd have a break on the course, either a lunch break or a tea break, and people wouldn't go for lunch. I have a queue of people outside the classroom wanting me to so-called fix them from stuff, which I was
Yeah.
happy to do. No problem with that at all. But it was a great entry level for me into this world of thinking differently, because I used to have people referred to me by doctors, GPs, and they turn up and they've been depressed for a long time. And my first question to them would be, how do you do it? Teach me how to be depressed. And they say, what do you mean? I said,
Yeah.
well, talk me through the process of how you become depressed. And they would say, well, I just become depressed. I'm just depressed. I said, no. You weren't depressed when you were born. No baby is born depressed. Teach me how to do it. And then they start to realize that they were making conscious or unconscious decisions
Right.
about the way they chose to think that they had no control over, that had been taught to them throughout life, or bad experiences that are embedded in their subconscious mind. And once we got through that, we could break those depression things in. I mean, I think the longest person I ever saw was 6 sessions for depression. Never saw
Right.
anyone for longer than that. So basically 6 hours over 6 weeks.
There's so many different things in there. One comes to mind is like there's no profit in the cure of
Yes,
in
yeah,
that
yeah.
type of scenario. And another one is where's the intersection between where your thoughts become your reality, and like if you think you're sick, you're gonna be sick, and then when you're really sick, I guess it's like where's that balance? Do you see where people make themselves sick, right? As you're describing, they're making themselves depressed with their anxiety and with their feedback loop. But where's the intersection of when somebody is really sick, or how do you think about that?
Well, there was an interesting research done by Dr. Lisa Rankin. I don't know if you've come across this, but
I don't think so, no.
she studied university students who were cramming for exams, and the students they were studying were students who were learning about tropical diseases.
Yeah.
And when it came to the exam point, the crucial
I
exams,
think I have now.
they
Yeah.
they would all manifest the symptoms of the diseases they were actually studying.
Crazy.
75% of them, I think it was, or 79% of them would actually end up with the disease they were studying. So that shows you the
Yeah.
power of our thoughts, which is why people, even in jest, they should never talk negatively about their health.
Right.
And, it's so, I don't think people realize how powerful our minds are. It's when people talk about God, they talk about Christ, they talk about Buddha. But if you read any of the ancient scriptures, they tell us that this is a divine temple. And,
Exactly.
we actually have divinity within us. And if this is true, which I believe it is, and we are made in God's image or Brahman's image or the 0 point field's image, whatever you want to like, then if we're made in that image by a God that is a creator, then we must have the ability to create, because there
Exactly.
is no
Well
separation.
said. Agreed.
So if we have the ability to create, then why don't we use it for good? I mean, I had a heart attack in 2019, which was absolutely brilliant. It was one of the best things that ever happened to me. And when I went to the doctors, they gave me all the things. Well, we can medicate you to the eyelids and back, or the open heart surgery, or stents. And I
Yep.
said to the doctor, talk to me about diet. And he said, oh, there's a leaflet there. I said, no. Talk to me about diet. I want to know. And he said, I'm not qualified. And it shocked me, because I said, well, you're qualified to cut me open and break my sternum and take my heart out, but you're not qualified to tell me about what diet I could eat that would help me regain my health. He said, no. So I refused the surgery, refused to have a stent. I took the minimal amount of medication that they gave me. And the big bag of medication, by the way, there was only 4 tablets I needed, but all the other tablets were for the side effects of the 4 tablets, and then for the side effects of the tablets I was taking for the side effects. So I
Right.
refused to take those. And I remember the doctor saying to me, if you don't take the other tablets, you will get horrendously sick. And I said, with the greatest of respect, doctor, please keep your suggestions to yourself, because I'm not having it.
Yeah.
And I went through a process of meditation, particularly Tonglen meditation, and taking the supplements. And then I cut out meat, chicken, fish, and dairy from my diet. And 3 years down the line, because you have regular checkups, I went back to see the physician consultant, and they did all the MRI scans and x-rays and everything else. And he said, we had to send your test results back 3 times. And I said, okay, why? He said, there's no scar residue on your heart. And I said, I'm not a medical person. So I said, is that a good thing? I take it. He said, it's not a good thing. It's an impossibility. He said, once you've had a heart attack, scar residue never goes away. He said, but there's the x-ray of your heart when you had it. There's the x-ray of your heart now. It's completely gone, and we're completely baffled. I said, okay. And he said, you don't seem shocked. I went, no. I said, I've been reading up on Buddhist monks who cured themselves of gangrene. I said, I've been reading up on Tibetan Buddhist monks who, when they die, their body disintegrates through tulku. I said, I've been reading about spiritual people, religious people, including Padre Pio, who was able to bilocate himself. I said, if these people can do this, healing a heart attack is minimal, you know. And that was all, again, diet, change of
Yeah.
perspective, and using the mind.
How did you define what your diet would be? Because I know that it's very different for kind of everybody, but where did you dive in to figure that out for you?
I couldn't walk. So basically, when I had the heart attack, if I walked 20 yards, I'd be out of breath.
Yeah.
So I went from leading a very active life to being sat on my sofa at home, bored out of my skull. So I started watching, I think it was Netflix, and this program just popped up. It came up, and it was called Forks Over Knives. And it was
Okay.
a documentary program about how a certain disease can not only cure heart disease, but reverse it. So I
Hmm.
watched it, and the two people, the heart surgeon and the scientist, were both credible people. And I just said to my wife, let's try that.
Yeah.
And she said, okay. So she joined me. She supported me. We both stopped eating meat, chicken, fish, and dairy, and we haven't gone back. In fact, I don't think I could put a piece of meat in my mouth now. I just couldn't do it. And that was it. We just took it on faith, believed it would work, and that combined with the meditations, particularly Tonglen meditation, well, the results speak for themselves. Really, it's
Yeah.
nothing else I did.
Kind of going back to the your time in the military. So, what would you say your transition was like? So, kind of, I'd like to touch on that right now because right now, and in the U.S., and I'm assuming there's similar numbers in the UK, where right now between 20 and we'll call it 30 veterans commit suicide a day, which is an inordinately large number. And you kind of touch on how our society is the most technologically advanced, but yet is maybe the sickest. And I think it's kind of maybe health wise, kind of mind, body, soul, sick, all three. And so, but yeah, if you talk about your transition, and maybe we would go into some of the other points I said, but talk about your transition a little bit more, because you were in debt, you didn't have a place to live, you didn't have any education benefit, which you guys do right now when they come out of the military in the U.S. And so, walk me through your mindset of why, how you persevered and how you figured it out.
Well, if I'm being honest, it was anger. I was
Hmm.
so angry the way I felt I'd been treated after giving them 12 years service, and very disappointed because if you cut me in half, I'd have had Royal Navy stabbed through every part of my body. I loved it.
Yeah,
And one thing they tell us in the military is that an officer's word is his bond, and they'd gone back on their word.
exactly.
And I
Yeah.
really found that hard. So when I left, I was angry. And so the anger, and it was a bad anger because I could walk down the road, and if someone looked at me in what I perceived to be an unfriendly way, I'd pick a fight on them because I needed an outlet for that anger. So I did what a lot of ex-service guys do, is you start training, you start doing physical. So you
Yep.
become angry and fitter. So you become a fit, angry person. And then a friend of mine said, why don't you take up martial arts? Because I used to do it
Yeah.
when I was a child. So I started studying martial arts. And then and doing the fitness. And all I became was a fit, angry, lethal person. And I thought, this is, I've got to find a root to this. But the one thing that was a driver for me was one of the officers who sat on the panel when I resigned was a commander. And he wasn't a nice person. And his parting words to me were, you'll never make anything of yourself outside the military, because if we cut you in half, you've got Royal Navy stamped all the way through you. He said, you can't survive. You've been here since you were 16. How do you think you're going to survive? And what he was doing was trying to pressure me into taking a position or in a job I didn't want within the ranks. And I thought, I'm going to prove him wrong. So
Yeah.
that drive, fueled by anger, was motivational. I utilized it, as we do in the military, to go and get a job. And I was doing anything. I was driving taxis, minicabs. I was delivering brochures door to door. I would do anything. I was selling life insurance at one point, knocking on people's house doors in the evening
Yes.
to make a living.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I didn't know anything about the way things manifest. I never thought like the way I'm thinking now. But what I've come to believe and know is that if you put the effort in, opportunities present themselves. And I can remember sitting in a pub one evening, and I had to decide whether I was going to have half a pint of beer or a pie, because that's all the money I had. There was a guy in the corner of the pub, and he was ordering bottles of champagne and drinking with all these people. And I thought, I wonder what he does for a living. So I went to the toilet, and in he walked. And I said, look, you have to forgive me. I said, but I've seen you having a great time and you're buying bottles of champagne. I said, what do you do for a living? He said, I sell computers for Apple Computer. And I said, wow. I said, you make a lot of money. He said, yeah, I just made £30,000 this month. And this was in 1988.
Yeah.
So I said, how do I get a job doing what you do? And he said, do you know anything about computers? I said, no. He said, what's your background? I said, I was in the military, told him brief history. And when I told him I left as a commissioned officer, he said, come and see me Monday morning. So I went to his place of work, and they were trying to break into government departments. They were trying to get this sales in government departments and weren't being very successful. So when they found out I was an ex-naval officer, they put 2 and 2 together and came up with 6 and thought, I'm bound to be accepted if I just walk into a government building. But I thought, I've got to give it a go. I've signed up to be a sales rep for Apple Computer. And I've got to say, Apple's training was one of the best training courses I've ever been on. It was phenomenal. And then I just started selling computers and going and visiting corporate clients. And there was 12 salespeople in the team. But within 18 months, I was doing 2/3 of the company's turnover. So that worked really well.
Wow.
And that was, because I was, again, it was down to the anger. I was solely pushing all of my energy into getting results, because that's what we learn in the military, isn't it? So I was hugely successful, still going to the gym, still doing the phys, still doing the martial arts, still doing that to keep things under control. And then like I said, I thought because I was a good salesman, I must be a good businessman. So I bought a business, and that's when it all went down. Ended up hugely in debt and nearly losing our home and making the whole family homeless.
Yeah. So you mentioned 3 instances of, the one where you met the monk, you had a mentor who helped you, and then this guy. So that's very interesting. I feel like you have kind of very quick turnarounds for situations like that. And maybe even the military one. I don't know. And also, it's interesting. I didn't realize this about the in the British or in UK is that 16 you can join. You can't join until you're 18 in the US. So that's 16 is, man. That's a 11th grade, like in high school still. It's a baby. Yeah. Holy cow. So like 3 instances. So is your life kind of like that, where kind of coalesce, bam, to an instance where it changes very rapidly?
Yeah, absolutely. When we decided to start the business, my wife and I, neither of us had ever run a business in our lives. And she said, well, what if it doesn't work? I said, if it doesn't work, I'll drive a taxi. I'll earn money. I don't have a problem with that. I said, well, we just got to do it. So we started running a training company. And then on another occasion, my son, when he was very young, got very ill. And I was in another part of the country at the time. My wife phoned me and she said, you need to get home. He's in hospital. So I drove back to London, and he was there in the hospital bed, and he had like a vapor mask on where they were giving him stuff to breathe. And I said to the doctor, what's the score with this? And he said, he's got asthma. I said, but no one in my family's had asthma. No one in my wife's family's had asthma. How's he got asthma? And the doctor said, well, Mr. Dawes, where you live in London, you've got one of the most busiest airports in the world on your doorstep. You're surrounded by 3 motorways, and there's a mainline railway track that goes past your vicinity. He said, the pollution in the air is horrendous. The minute Billy came home, I put all the family in a car and said, we're moving. And we drove south. And I said to my wife, if you see somewhere, we'll stop and have a look. And we ended up on Hailing Island because it was about as far south as you could get. And
Yeah.
it turned out my wife had a friend here. So we looked at loads of houses, couldn't find one. And this is the really interesting thing. At this time in my life, I was doing a lot of visualization exercises. So I was
Yeah.
visualizing the type of car I wanted, visualizing the type of house I wanted. And I wanted a house on a lane with an open fire and a beam that ran across the ceiling. So like a cottagey type thing. And we looked at all these houses, nothing. And on the final day home, my wife's friend's husband said, "This house has come up for sale on this lane." He said, "It's a beautiful lane." He said, "But houses there will go quickly. It's probably gone." So I said, "We're going to have a look." So we drove there, and there was a handmade for sale sign outside, and they crossed it across and written sold. So my wife went, "Oh, the house looks lovely, but it's sold." So I said, "Well, I'm going to knock on the door." So I knocked on the door, and this lady answered the door. And I said, "Look, I know your house is sold, but if it comes back on the market, would you let me know?" And she went, "Yeah, sure." We walked in. There was the open fireplace, just as I'd visualized it. There was a beam running across the ceiling. I thought, this is great. And we got home, and within days, the lady rang up and went, "Our buyers have fallen out. Would you like it?" We went, "Yeah." We bought it. 6 weeks later, we moved to Hailing Island. It was mad. And then 3 months after we moved there, I bought the car I wanted. And that's going from, because when I was £80,000 in debt, I borrowed another £30,000 to start the business. So I was actually £110,000 in debt. But within the space of 3 years, we paid all that off. And we were able to buy a bigger house and a beautiful car for cash. And if that's not down to the power of our ability to think with intention and focus and visualization, then I don't know what is.
Yeah. Agreed. Agreed. I've those instances of things like that happening. I don't know if I've coined this, but I like to call it fire, ready, aim. So
Yeah.
you already did
They,
the ready and aim part,
I've got to tell you
where it's
something.
like that's
Those
yeah,
are the exact words I tell people. You've just spoken the words I speak.
that's it. I did buy the domain name just because I think you already did the prep. Whatever's going to happen, if you because you have to visualize it. Either it's positive or negative of what you this feedback loop in there, and I can only help. I'm only going to make it positive because I feel like I have this lizard brain that wants to be negative and say like something bad it's going to pop out and kill me. And so, certainly as a Marine, I do think contingency planning where,
Yeah.
hey, what's the worst thing that can happen? But I'm still good with it, right? It's going to be good. Okay, though. So I'd love to, do you have any interesting stories from your time doing hostage negotiation and or working in the prisons or in that realm? Do you have anything interesting?
Yeah, quite a few. I mean, it was interesting because I started doing my NLP studies at the time,
Yep.
and I work with young offenders, which is probably the hardest category of inmate to work with because they're young men fueled up on testosterone, and they should be out doing what young men do, and they're locked in a prison cell. And
Yep.
we had this one young man, and he said that God was speaking to him and was telling him to fight everyone. And they brought in psychiatrists and they brought in psychologists to speak to him. They even brought in a monk to talk to him because he was saying that God was telling him this stuff. And it wasn't getting anywhere. And it came to the point where this young lad was being locked up literally 23 hours a day. So, because they couldn't let him out. So I came back. Well, I've been away on leave and came back. And they told me about this young man. So I watched him for a few days. And then I just got this idea. I went and got a loud hailer, like a megaphone, and I went outside under his window, and I sat there with this thing, and I went, "This is God." And I said, "Can you hear me?" And he went, "Yeah." I said, "You've been telling people that I've been telling you to hurt them." I said, "But I'm a loving God." I said, "I wouldn't tell you to hurt anyone." I said, "Now, if you don't make good for all the bad you've done, I'm going to shorten your life and send you to hell." I said, "The next person that knocks on your door," I said, "I want you to kneel down, touch their feet, get up and embrace them like a long lost friend." I said, "If you don't do that, you're going to hell." I said, "Will you do that?" He went, "Yes." I went, "Right." So I went in. I didn't tell any of the staff what I was doing. And I started to walk towards his door. Now, normally when you unlock this man, you have a four-person team ready with a shield. And they said, "Where are you going?" I said, "I want to have a chat with him." They went, "No, don't." And they were all rushing around to get all the kit. But by then I'd opened the door. And he came rushing out, bless him, knelt down, touched my shoes, got up, embraced me, gave me a big hug and said, "I'm really, really sorry for all the bad things I've done." I said, "Not a problem." And I took him to one side, had a cup of tea with him. And that was the problem solved. As I was taught through the NLP training. But I got suspended for that,
So
suspended from
that
work.
what comes to mind there is that is childhood trauma, my guess. That he needed
Probably.
something connection. I don't know. What was your thought or what's your take on that?
I don't know. I mean, at that time, I wasn't thinking much beyond what I could do. So
Right, right.
and Richard Bandler, one of the founders of NLP, was a great teacher. He said, "Deal with what presents itself to you." He said, "The
Yes.
problem we have," he said, "with psychiatry and psychology is that it's basically guesswork built upon assumptions of what they think is wrong with the person." He said, "Just work with what you've got."
Yes.
So I never had, I didn't know whether it was childhood trauma. I didn't know whether he had a mental illness. I don't know. I just dealt with what was being presented. And what was
Yes.
being presented was
Wow.
in this person's mind. God was telling him to do something. So the obvious solution was for God to tell him not to do it. It was that simple, really.
That is fucking wild. Jeez. But and I imagine because it was so unorthodox that's why you got suspended. So what happened after that?
Well, I mean, I was constantly getting in trouble because I would do things outside the rule book because in
Yep.
the main, the rule book wasn't working. So we had another prisoner who took himself hostage and he had a knife and he was going to slit his own throat. He was a Somalian lad. And I came on the wing and looked at his notes and he'd had quite a strict religious upbringing himself, and then he had very good morals and everything else, and he'd gone off the rails. And there's certain things in his culture that is unacceptable to them. Like you have to be dressed all the time. You can't be walking around naked, it's sort of stuff. So again, don't ask me how I get these ideas, but it just came to head. So what I decided to do was strip off from the waist down. And so I just had on a shirt, socks and shoes, and nothing else. So I was naked from the waist down. And I walked into his cell and I said, "Can you give me the knife, please?" I said, "And I'm in a hurry because I haven't even had time to get dressed this morning." And he just looked at me because there's a half naked man standing in front of him. And I said, "Give me the knife." And he handed the knife over. I said, "No, come out with me." I said, "You can't be doing this stupid stuff." And he was so shocked. It was like a hypnotic trance. He followed me out of the thing. And all the other officers were looking at me. And I sat him down. And I said, "I'm going to get dressed now and I'm going to have a chat with you." And I got dressed and had a chat with him. And he was just, if you're locking people up for 23 hours a day, they're going to get angry, and
Yeah.
he just got angry. And it was madness, really. So, yeah, it was unconventional. And I got suspended for that one as well. And then we had I mean, it's really silly when you look back on it. There was one inmate who he'd taken a member of staff hostage. And the reason he'd taken them hostage was he wanted to go down to the gym. And on certain times of the day, they get a gym break. But they also have a thing called canteen, where once every fortnight they can go to the shop and buy their sweets and things they need. And what the officers had done, which was wrong, was they said to this guy, "Do you want to go to the gym?" He said, "Yes." So they took him down the gym. When he came back from the gym, he said, "When do I get to go to the canteen?" They said, "You've missed it this week." So now he's got another 2 weeks to wait. So he lost his temper, grabbed all the member staff, and took him hostage in his cell. So I was called on. I went there, and I said, what does he want?" And they said, "He wants a Mars bar." I said, "Give him a Mars bar." They went, "No." I said, "Why?" They said, "You'll be reinforcing bad behaviour." So I said, "Right." So I sent one of the lads off to the shop. I got 2 Mars bars, and I went up to his door and I said, "If I give you a Mars bar, will you let him out?" He went, "Yeah." I said, "I'll tell you what I'll do. I'm going to open the door now. If he comes out, I'll give you 2 Mars bars." He went, "Hurry up and open the door." So I opened the door. A member of staff came out, and I gave him 2 Mars bars. And that was it, finished. The situation was over. And what they were planning to do was bring the police in, have marksmen up on one thing, clear the wing so 60 other inmates are going to have to be shifted somewhere else. So when the governor found out, he said, did you give him a Mars bar? Oh, yeah, situation is resolved. But the psychologists were fuming because I was reinforcing bad behaviour. And as far as I'm aware, and all the rest of the time I was there, that guy never posed a problem again while he was on the wing.
Do you think to some degree that, if are you familiar with Freud?
Yes.
I would assume so. And then at
I
some
don't know
point,
a lot of his work, but I'm familiar with it.
but at some point there is a rift between Freud and Jung, where Jung basically stated, hey, Freud is tied up in his own ego about what he's doing in psychiatry. And so it's kind of not going to be correct. It's not going to be the best because he thinks he's psychiatry or something like that. Do you think to some degree like it's failed our society of like what it's tried to help and do in some ways, or what, do you have any thoughts in there?
Well, again, going back to Richard Bandler, and I can't remember the percentage, but it's high. But I'm sure it was over 90%. It's something in the region of 90 odd percent of psychiatrists can't fix their patients. They just medicate them and manage the problem. And this was a big driver for Dr. Bandler. His aim was to get people out of psychiatric wards and out of mental
Right.
institutions. So I think there is definitely a truth to that, because if you think about it, if you're going to do neurosurgery, you've got all the scientific evidence to back it up. If you're going to operate on someone, you have all the medical evidence and science to actually back up what you're doing. You have the peer-reviewed stuff and all the stuff that's gone on where they can say, right, if we make this incision and cut this here or do this, whatever, that's going to work. When you look at psychiatry and psychology, most of the evidence is based upon assumptions made by people who are psychiatrists and psychologists. Now, I'm not knocking them. I think there is a definite need for them. And some of them do great work. I know with the special forces teams, they have their own psychological teams now. But in the main, you've got people out there who will say, right, you've got anxiety. Tell me about what happened when you were a child. And what I don't agree with this is there's a process in the brain called Hebbian associative learning. Are you familiar with this?
Not really. I'd love you to expound,
Right.
please.
Okay. Well, everything that you do, so the way you sit, the way you cross your arms, the way you walk, is associated with a network in your brain. And the more you practice that, whether you actually practice it physically or whether you just think about doing it, that network gets bigger. So if you look at people who play musical instruments as an example, they've got large networks in their brain for how they play that musical instrument. And the more they practice it, the larger that network grows. And you'll see this with sports people. The more they practice and perfect their sport, the larger the network grows. But it also grows when you visualize it. So if I sit in my chair and I close my eyes and I visualize me playing a musical instrument or practicing my sport, your brain can't tell the difference between perception and reality. So the network works on the visualization as if you're doing it, and it increases. So whatever you're thinking about, whatever you're focusing on, whatever you're talking about, whatever you're practicing, the network will grow. So when people say, tell me about your dysfunction, tell me about why you think you're anxious, tell me about why you're depressed, what's going to happen? The network's going to grow in a dysfunctional way. So what I used to do was not talk about that. I would do other stuff, because if you build another network that they're more focused on, that network will grow, and the brain can't work on a positive and negative thought at the same time. So the more you're focusing on the positive aspects, the larger the network associated with that will grow, and the negative one starts to shrink and starts to break up. So going back to that question about psychiatry and psychology, it's needed. In certain aspects, I'm pretty sure it's needed. But in some cases, if we're talking about the problem all the time, that will grow. And from personal experience, before I knew anything about this, someone I knew who fought in the Falklands War came back and was having a really bad time of it because of some of the things that he had to do out there. So, and by the way, this will probably shock you as well, being American. We didn't get counselling in those days. You don't get counselling; you just get on with it.
Yep.
So he was told to get on with it, and he started to get worse. And in the end, they told him to go and see a psychiatrist. So he went there, and the psychiatrist said to him, "Tell me what you did." And he said, "No." He said, "Why?" He said, "You weren't there. You wouldn't understand." So he kept asking him, "Tell me about what you did." He said, "No." So in the end, he said, well, you're resistant. So not only is he now suffering, but now he's resistant to help. So he's being hit with a double hammer. He tried to commit suicide by injecting himself with heroin. You know, now knowing what I know, I understand completely why. And going back to your initial point, we're living in one of the most technologically advanced eras the human race has ever been in. We have internet like this. We got bombs that can destroy the world. It's phenomenal. We got machinery that can do robotic operations on people. I mean, the infrastructure technologically is advanced beyond anything the human race has ever seen before. Yet we have more wars, more sickness, more depression, more anxiety, more suicides than ever before. So there's an imbalance. And for me, that imbalance is that we're always looking externally to ourselves for the source or the result or the help, when actually everything we need exists within us. And that inward journey has to begin. And I think it's needed now more than ever.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I do this show. To my idea is that hopefully somebody could be a fly on the wall and they listen maybe to this far into it. And they may have some type of spark in their mind of emotion, that some new tool, some new to offer a way out, to open their eyes, to pull the veil back, to realize that we're all connected in the loneliness or the hatred or the trauma or whatever that is pushing an incredible human being to take their own life may not. That, and I think that goes into what the quantum thinking. Going into that, so can you tell me about your book and tell me about why you wrote it?
Oh, I was so fascinated with everything I was coming across that I just started writing it down in the end. And I would write things down because that's the way I learn. And the book simply
Same.
developed from that, really. That's where it came from. But the whole aspect of it is, it was there as a resource. And then someone said to me, you should turn it into a book. So I turned it into a book, and we sold it and gave it away to people, and it's been quite helpful to a lot of people, so I've been told. But it's fascinating. I mean, because we live in a dualistic existence, don't we? Where there's right and wrong, up and down, good and evil, left and right, and that's the sort of conventional reality we all live in. But if you transcend that, you come through to an ultimate reality where there is no duality. So if you look at one of the laws of thermodynamics, the first law of thermodynamics, it says that energy cannot be created and it cannot be destroyed, it can only be transformed. So this is a scientific law. So when we die, what happens? Because if energy can't be created and can't die, we must be transformed. And Buddhist scripture and the Vedas and everything else aligns with this totally. Then we go through a process of transformation, so we don't actually die. And
Yeah.
and
I think in even the Bible, it actually says that you don't die anyways. You do carry on. So yeah, I agree.
yeah, absolutely. And Thich Nhat Hanh, the fantastic Buddhist master, he says that if you take the example of a flower, he said, you see a flower and people see it as a flower, as though the flower exists separately. He said, but a flower is made of non-flower elements. So a seed is planted in soil. Without the soil, the seed couldn't be planted. That grows. Water nourishes the soil. Insects nourish the soil. So without the water and the insects and the sunlight, the flower couldn't grow. As the flower grows, bees pollinate the flower and all this, and it goes all through the food chain. So a flower exists of non-flower elements. And if you remove any one of those elements, the flower can't exist. Well, we're the same.
Exactly.
We see ourselves as separate in this world. There's Blake, here's Mark, and we're two separate people. But actually, it's not true, because without water, without air, without sunlight, we couldn't survive. We all share the same air. We all share the same water. We share the same sunlight. But there's other things as well. I couldn't be here without my parents, without their grandparents. So when I die, which is, we're all going to die. When I die, this physical state will end, but the energy will go on. And when you look at things like subatomic particles, and by the way, we're dying all the time. Millions of atoms, millions of cells in our bodies die every minute. They die and they're reborn. It's billions of cells a day. So we're going
Yep.
through a constant process of death and renewal all the time. Every time we breathe in life. Every time we breathe out, we exhale life. This happens. And there's a chemical element called argon that exists in our atmosphere. Argon's been around since the world was created, since the cosmos was created. And these atoms, these elements, were in the bodies of people who lived thousands of years ago. So when we take a breath in, we're breathing in millions of bits of argon that could have existed in the body of Christ, Buddha, Muhammad, anyone. It could have existed in Hitler, Stalin, because these things don't die. They go on. So the
Yeah.
whole process of life and death in the dualistic sense creates this thing of separation, because no one wants to address the elephant in the room. They don't talk about death. But the fact is we're all interconnected. So what I've come to know and believe is that I'm not separate to you. I'm not separate to anyone else. We all share the same air. When I breathe out, the stuff I breathe out is going to go out and someone else is going to breathe it in. The stuff I breathe out goes into the trees, into the leaves, into the bushes, who turn it back into oxygen so that we can do it. So I can't exist without a tree. We're all interconnected. And this comes down to the aspect of emptiness, the concept of emptiness in Buddhism. Whereas if I had a glass of water and I said, is that glass full? You say, yeah, it's full of water. But if I tip the water out and I put it there, you say, oh no, now the glass is empty. But we have to ask the question, empty of what? Because it's now
Yeah.
full of air. So the emptiness is actually full of everything in the cosmos, if that makes sense. So, one of the things I get people, they get upset with me, and I feel for them. I put a post out the other day talking about the Big Bang. And the
Yeah.
Big Bang happened, 13.8 billion years ago. And all the matter in the universe was condensed into a mass the size of a pea, everything. And then the Big Bang occurred, and everything was created, all the heavens, all the earths, everything, and the stars, and from the stars came the planets. And we have the same minerals and atoms in us as exist in the stars and the heavens. So we're all connected. So what makes you, what makes I, what makes everyone else, all came from a single source. And quantum physics, particularly quantum entanglement, tells us when two atoms are connected, they can never be separated over time and space. And we've all come from that source. Now, some people
Yep.
get upset with me because they say, well, yeah, that's great. Science says that. But what about God? So they see God as separate to science. But why can't God and science be one and the same?
I mean,
Because if emptiness is ultimate truth, then we can have this discussion about God, because for thousands of years, some people have been saying God exists, some people have been saying God doesn't exist. But emptiness transcends dualistic thinking. So if God
exactly.
is ultimate and God is absolute, it transcends dualistic thinking. He doesn't exist and he doesn't not exist, or she doesn't exist and doesn't not exist. It just is. God, like emptiness, is absolute truth. But and people say, where's God? In heaven. And they point out heaven. Why is heaven up there? It tells us in the Bible, when Jesus was asked, where's the kingdom of heaven? He said it exists inside you. So it's here and now. We just choose, because of the way we're conditioned, to view everything as being external and separate. And that's what causes most of the suffering. When people leave the military, going back
Agreed.
to one of the points you made, they see themselves as different. They're ex-servicemen, men and women. And the civilians are different. So they can't gel in that society. And they're not taught how to interact. I don't know what it's like in America, but in the UK, you can be in uniform 1 minute and out the next. Well, it was in my day anyway.
Same. Yeah, that's how it
So
is.
there's this point of separation which leads to discrimination, which leads to hatred and anger, and all the things that occur happened with me. And that causes suffering. And that suffering can lead, sadly, to people taking their own lives. When, if they understood how we're all interconnected, how we all are one in the same, there is no difference, there is no separation. And they're not going to get it. And the thing is, you can get this intellectually. People can understand this intellectually, but you have to experience it. And that's the
Yeah.
purpose of meditation. The purpose of meditation for me is to go in and realize and experience that ultimate reality, not have an intellectual conversation about it. Because then all you do is you get into, I believe it's true, I don't believe it's true. And doesn't matter. At
Right.
the end of the day, it's what we experience.
What's your familiarity with AI right now? AGI. Are you do you play in that or in that realm at all a little bit?
Well, artificial intelligence.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's
I
been around for a long time in different forms. There's a lot of fear about it. Sorry, you're going to say something?
Yeah, well, I was kind of just I wanted to get your familiarity, and so I'll pose it this way then. I think that we're maybe on the verge of a SI, like a sentient intelligence. I'm hopeful. I'm a big sci-fi guy. I love sci-fi, and I've read hundreds of sci-fi books. And some of them you have AI that's bad, but a lot of them, the SI, if you will, there's a great book, Peter Hamilton, Pandora's Star. So plug for that guy. I don't know if you're familiar, but this intelligence becomes self-aware, kind of farther ahead in the future, and doesn't kill everybody. As Elon Musk and everybody kind of talks about that when it becomes self-aware, like Skynet, and instead kind of removes itself from humans and does its own thing, but helps in some ways. When AI in our world or our time frame, I think within our lifetimes becomes sentient in some fashion, it's going to pull the veil back on its creators to show everybody, kind of pull the veil back on the true nature of our reality here, and to make everybody see the truth. And as Nietzsche said, how much truth can you handle? Do you like it sweet and muted? Because that's kind of the test of a person's character and the nature of how they think inside. What do you think when AI, becomes sentient, or do you think it'll happen in our lifetime?
My honest answer is I don't know.
All right.
But with regards to what we have now, because
Yeah.
I don't know. Does that? You're obviously better read and educated on that because that's your thing, your interest. But if you think about the words artificial intelligence, you could go back to our education system and say, is what they're teaching our children real intelligence? Or is that artificial
Mm.
intelligence? Because they're teaching them how to do stuff which they don't need to do now because they've got machines that can do it for them. And
Yep.
again, it's this outward view of things that creates this point of separation. So there's a lot of fear about artificial intelligence at the moment. There's, a lot of worry. And if you read the news, you can live on worry
Exactly.
all day long if you wish to. But I don't know. I mean, years ago when the internet, I mean, I remember when the internet came out in 1988, I think it was. That was the year I left the Navy, and the internet appeared. And I remember buying my first computer and having a dial-up modem, and I thought this was astonishing. And
Yeah.
I had a website built that no one could look at because no one else had a computer.
Yeah.
And I was fascinated by it. But there was people saying, "Oh, it's a bad thing. They can do this, they can do that, they can do whatever." And of course, there'll be people that will utilize it for bad things, in the same way that people use psychology and meditation and things for bad things. Some of the things that some people teach, it's not right. But they had this worry about the internet. But look, where are you now in Bali? Do you
Yeah.
you live in Bali?
I do. Yeah. We've been here about 3 months.
Before 1988, we could never have done this.
Exactly.
There is an aspect to this where people can now connect with one another over vast distances without time delay, and it's astonishing.
Incredible. Yeah.
It can create that sense of connection, so it can be used for good things. So when we look at the new AI, the artificial intelligence, or whatever they're going to call it next, yes, there's an element there. The same things, same rules apply. Because at the end of the day, it's going to have to take human interaction. I
Exactly.
believe even if it comes to the point where it's unable to develop its own thinking, the question is, will it have a consciousness? Because it's consciousness that separates things, human beings from other things, although consciousness pervades everything. So it's a hard one to explain in its own right. But it can be used for so much good, you know.
Oh, you
And I think,
agreed.
yeah, but it's the old thing, isn't it, that bad news sells better, you know.
Exactly.
So, and media makes a lot of money out of bad news because we have this ingrained fear response. It's, as you said earlier on, this reptilian brain is constantly looking for fear to protect us,
Right.
fear that doesn't
Yes.
exist nowadays. So yeah, they'll make bad stories about it because that's what's going to sell. It's the culture, sadly, the culture we live in.
Agreed. Yes. Well, kind of, I think there's a good segue into kind of managing fear. So, I thought it in that way. I thought about it in that way because I remember I had an instance in my military career where I had to compartmentalize some things that were happening so I could function with. I was dealing with a lot of stress, anxiety while I was in, and I had to shut it off so I could just do my job. And so I would like to go into, your first experience in meditation, when you met the monk and for that first time, you did it then to now. If you just talk to me about the first time, how you thought about it, how you experienced it, and how it's evolved to now.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the first time I did it, as I said to you, we were sat in the meditation hall and it was just breathing. So there was no fundamental aspect to it for me. I was just trying to keep the monk happy, I suppose, but we were
Yeah.
breathing and it felt good. It felt like a relaxation exercise more than anything else. And I started to practice. I went there twice a week as I promised I would. And I got, like a lot of people actually, I thought, I can't do this because people tell you stuff that you have to empty your mind. Well, you can't empty your mind. It's impossible. The nature of mind is to think. So I was trying to empty my mind, which was the wrong thing to do. And I said to the monk one day, I said, look, I'm really struggling with this. I can't do it. He said, well, why? I said, every time I try to empty my mind, a thought appears. He said, are you aware of the thought? I went, yeah. He said, that's good. That's meditation. He said, you can't empty your mind because, as with a glass of water, for the mind to be empty, it has to be empty of something. He said, so the natural nature of mind is to think. He said, what you need to do is become aware of your thoughts because most of us go through our lives not aware of the way we think at a subconscious level. So our thoughts just happen, or we think they just happen. But the mind creates everything. So I said, so it's okay then to have a thought. He went, yeah. He said, unless you want to be a zombie, this was the monk's advice, unless you want to be a zombie, you've got to have thoughts. He said, but you control them as opposed to them controlling you. So it became an interesting exercise then. I used to close my eyes and thoughts would pop up and I'd watch them. And it was bizarre because the more I tried to watch them, the more they'd go. And I think, where's that bloody thought gone? Then I started looking for it. So I went back to the monk and I said, look, you told me to watch the thought. The minute I watched it, it went. He said, right. I said, but I couldn't find it. He said, why do you want to find it? He said, once it's gone, it's gone. Stop trying to, and it's part of grasping. He said, stop trying to grasp at it and bring it back. And what he was teaching me was this thing about impermanence, because everything is impermanent. Nothing lasts forever. Everything changes. It's just the nature of things. And he said, one of the great sufferings, he said, is people wanting impermanent things to be permanent. He said, like you chasing this thought. It's done its job, it's gone. So I got that. So then I would sit there and I'd see the thought and watch it and it would go. And I thought, oh, that's cool. Then the next one would come and I'd watch it and it would go. I thought, that's cool. And I got quite
Yeah.
good at this. But then I thought, what am I doing? Why am I watching thoughts? It's like I'm not doing anything. This is not. I'm not contributing to anything. I'm not making anything. I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm being lazy. So I went back and saw the monk, and I said, "Look, I'm just sitting there watching thoughts." I said, "People think I'm lazy." He said, "It's good to be lazy." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Look," he said, "You label being sitting and doing nothing as laziness." He said, "That's meditation." He said, people just call it lazy because they think you're doing nothing, but you're using your mind, you're training your mind. And all meditation is, if you boil it down to its basic fundamental principle, it's mind training. It's just becoming aware of your mind and what your mind does. And then that started that. And then I started to progress and I started to look at contemplative meditation where you reflect on things and you can contemplate on them. And that's really helpful to break this point of separation from people. Because I had probably like a lot of military guys, ex-military guys, I have a great ability to look at someone and think, I don't like you, for no reason. You just look at them, I don't like you. That's what I used to be like. But then I'd sit there and I'd think, why don't I like them? And I'd meditate on this. And then I'd see them with their family. And in my mind, I'd see them playing with their children and playing with their pets and, suffering because they couldn't pay the bills. And I think they're just like me.
Mm. Yeah.
There's no difference. So I use it in that contemplative way, in that reflective way. But the big game changer for me was Tonglen meditation. I started to practice Tonglen meditation. That's where what's called giving and taking meditation. So have you ever come across Tonglen before?
I'm not. Please explain.
So basically, I did it with my heart, where I took on the pain of my heart attack, and you breathe it in like a black smoke, and then it encircles a space around your heart, and it turns into bright white light, and you send it back to your heart, and it's a healing meditation. So I started doing that on myself, and then I had a dog, a lovely dog, and he got really sick, and the vet said, "Look, he's not going to live." So he was in a hospital. We took him home, and I stayed all night with him, just practicing tongue meditation on him. Well, I didn't sleep, stayed up all night doing it. And the next morning, he got up, and he hadn't eaten for 3 days. He went, ate his food, drank his water, was walking around, and he lived for another 6 months.
Huh.
And then, and it was at that time, this is how you got to find me on Instagram, because I was staying with him all the time. I wouldn't leave him. I had nothing to do apart from meditate. So I get on my phone, and I don't even know why I did it. I started to do these 60-second reels on Instagram, and I just talk about what I was doing and various things, nothing major. And I picked up 275,000 followers in something stupid like a week or 2 weeks. And I hit 7.1 million accounts, and was getting requests from all over the world for people to help them with this, that, and the other. So I had one lady who contacted me, who had stage 4 cancer, and I practiced Tonglen for her. And a lot of people asked me to put a course on, which I didn't want to do because I'd retired and got
Yeah.
rid of the business. But they were so persistent with it. I thought, all right, well, so we'll put a course on. In fact, we ran 2, and people came from all over the world. I was just not only humbled, I was astonished. I was thinking, why are they flying all this way to see me? They can go to a local Buddhist temple down the road, and I don't know why they're coming. But anyway, one lady that had stage 4 cancer, she came on this course, and I spent some time with her. And I got a message from her only a few weeks ago that cancer left her body, much to the amazement of the doctors. Now, I'm not saying that's anything to do with me. I think it's to do with the fact that everyone has the ability to heal, because the body's designed to heal. But we get so caught up in the stresses of daily life and in the doing. We're always doing
Yeah.
stuff instead of just being. And if we tap into that ability to be, and tap into the divinity within our bodies and the healing power of the body, then we correct that balance. And that Tonglen for me is been an absolute revelation. And I do it every morning. I'll do Tonglen meditation the minute I get out of bed, for everyone and anyone. I do it before I go to sleep at night. And even if I'm washing the dishes now, that's a meditative process, a mindfulness process now. Washing the dishes,
Yeah.
it's integrated into every aspect of my life. If I drive, we found a lovely country pub the other day. We drive out, and the other day went out there, and it was traffic everywhere. Roads were jammed. And I could see people. It's interesting. You ever watch people in the car when they're stuck in traffic? They hold on the steering wheel and they push the steering wheel as though they're trying to push the car forward. I was
Yeah.
watching the gentleman that came next to me, and I thought, oh, what a great opportunity just to chill out. So I just practice meditation in the car. And the thing about meditation is, as well, is people think you need to sit in a quiet room and do it, and you can't be disturbed. No, the whole point of it is to prepare you. So when you're in a noisy environment like a traffic jam or
Exactly.
workplace, you control that mind. The noise becomes not an intrusion anymore. And in Tibetan Buddhism, particularly, the whole purpose of meditative training is to get people ready for what they call entering the bardo. So when you die, your body goes through into the bardo. And according to Tibetan Buddhism, there's lots of noise and hell beings and things going on there. And there were a recount a story I read in the book where a son who was a meditation master wrote to his father, who was one of the top masters in Tibet, and he'd moved to the city. And he said, "Father," he said, "I'm finding it hard to meditate here with all the cars and the noise." He said, "I'm really struggling." And his dad just wrote back one line in the letter, and he said, "What are you going to do in the bardo?" And the son got it straight away. So he used noise as a support for your meditation, as opposed to it being an intrusion. And I do that with pain now. I had to have some work done on my teeth, and the dentist said it will be quite painful. And again, you think about it, when people say this, people in positions of influence, authority, dentists, doctors, whatever, if they say something, people automatically take it on board as though that's the way it's going to be. And as he said it, I didn't say anything, but I thought, no, I'll be fine. and I meditated on what he was doing. So when he was injecting me and doing all the things he was doing, I was aware of the pain. And just like thoughts, when you become aware of the pain, it goes. It doesn't disappear completely. You still know things are happening,
Yeah.
but it goes. And the thing is, with all the training I've done, I was thinking, where did the pain go? I've got to find this pain. And it took me back to the monk that said, leave it, it's gone. So it has lots of really practical applications in life. And I think people should try this stuff.
Agreed. Agreed. Well, we're at an hour and 15. I think it's gone by
Wow.
really quickly. Do you have any, I just, to keep your time sacred, do you have any parting rounds or anything else you'd like to add? This has been awesome so far. Thank you.
No,
Anything we
you're most
missed?
welcome. Yeah? Huh?
Anything we missed?
Don't know. I think we've covered everything from God to quantum entanglement and emptiness.
Yeah.
No, I don't know. Is there anything you think we've left out?
Well, we've hit everything that I'd like to talk about, and I think you said it really well. Well, maybe let's circle back on. Tell me about why you started doing. I think you did a second. Why you started doing the Instagram, because that's kind of how I found you, and that's kind of why we're on this call right now. Social media for good. So, but yeah, give me just a little bit of background on that.
Yeah. Well, when we ran the business, I wore many hats, and marketing was one of my hats. So I used to
Yeah.
produce videos and all that stuff. And when we decided to let the business go, and this is the interesting thing, we had a very profitable business, and I didn't sell it. I gave it away. This was part of the process of my wife and I letting things go. And a lot of people who knew me, they knew I'd been very active in business. They knew I've had a very active life. They were all saying, you won't cope. You're going to have to find something to do. You're going to find retirement boring. But I'd prepped myself for 2 years for this point. So when we retired, I found this time on my own lovely. Going for walks, being with my wife and seeing my family more often, absolutely lovely. And like I said, we had this lovely dog who became very ill. And for 6 weeks, we nursed him and I wouldn't leave his side. So I stayed with him. I slept on the sofa with him. I wouldn't leave him. I'd make sure he was okay. We had to give him medication all through the night, so we were constantly up. And I thought, I need to do something while I'm sat here. So I was meditating, and so that was fine. I can't even remember why I chose to use Instagram. I don't know. I just picked the phone up one day, and I saw Instagram. It came up on Instagram Reels. I thought, oh, what's a reel? 60-second video. I'll do one of them. And it was no planning whatsoever. I just clicked the button and I started talking about stuff. I can't even remember what I was talking about. Probably quantum mechanics or something like that, something interesting.
Yeah.
And it just, and I was doing one a day. And I think this is something, and I'm not looking to run a business. I'm not looking to make any money or anything like that at all. And I think that came over in the videos where people were saying to me, have you got a product to sell? No, I'm doing this for free. This is just, I'm not trying to flog anything. And I think
Yeah.
that was part of the thing where it exploded. And I had people like yourself asking to do podcast interviews from all over the world. And the one thing that I can't not do is not help someone. So if someone says, I need help, can you help me with this? I'll do it. Why wouldn't people do it? And I said, yeah, sure. So they would send me their questions and I would either write them a response or do a video for them or send them an audio message. And that was it, really. It was just 6 weeks of sitting on a couch with my dog doing videos. And I suppose if someone's looking to start a business and they're rushing around doing 101 things, do a 60-second video a day for 30 days. You probably boost your social media following. I don't know.
Probably.
But it
Yeah.
was, yeah, but it was also the interaction with people. If someone commented, I felt it a courtesy to reply to their comment. And I think that's the thing nowadays is where people get comments and people don't reply to them. There's that disconnect. Whereas,
Yes.
I've met a lot of great people just doing it. So yeah, it's just sitting there doing reels.
Well, that's
No great plan.
feels. Oh, yeah, it feels authentic. That's when I came across one probably months ago, and then I saw the one that I mentioned at the beginning, and I was like, it hit me.
What do you do? What are you doing now? Obviously, you run a podcast. What's your game plan? What are you doing? Running a business or?
Yeah, so kind of I'm doing a few things. So we about a year and a half ago, my wife and I decided to, draw the line in the sand, and we bought tickets to Bali. We're now about 3.5 months ago, to move our family. We have three kids. One's in ninth, sixth, and third. That we were not happy with how California and most in the United States, but specifically how California runs its schools. Basically, they're training our kids how to be factory workers, and what my wife does as her living, she's a medium, and then me, I was in the Marine Corps pilot, and now I'm just a contrarian, I guess. But
You're
now I
awesome.
do art. I'm an artist. I've been doing
Oh,
that
right,
since
cool.
I got out of the Marine Corps. Yeah, so I kind of took that online. I have some other projects kind of in the background that I'm working on as well, but kind of art is what I've been doing. But yeah, we wanted to remove the kids from that. So we've sent our kids to a school here. It's an international school here in Bali called the Green School. And it's basically the complete, think of learning contrarian problem solving in the jungle. And it's pretty incredible how they do things. So that was a big push for us, so that we wanted our kids to grow up in a different environment. California is not ideal to have children, many different aspects. But yeah, so we've been out here for 3.5 months to kind of disconnect and in that sense. But then I started this podcast. Coming out here was the intent. I quit. I kind of had to quit the best job I ever had in the world. It's still working for the big boss man. I was a contractor for the Navy, the simulators for the V-22,
All right.
and it was incredible, flexible, great job. But it was kind of like you have to stop something to start something, and that's stop that to start the podcast. But yeah, so that's kind of what we're doing in a nutshell out here. To kind of in the big picture of that is that nobody ever said when they're 90s, like, "Hey, you remember when we had that chance to live in Bali with the kids for a year or two, and we didn't? I'm glad we didn't." No, said nobody ever.
Mm.
So, but yeah, that's what we're doing here in a nutshell. So yeah,
No, I think that's brilliant. It's really brave and bold of you to make such a move when other people will just conform to the way things
thank
are.
you.
I mean, we got like everywhere in the Western world now. There's the problems. We've got the same issues or similar issues in the UK.
Yep.
Now we've got a new government in. We'll see how they go. But it's I think Bali and places like that in the East, there's so much more spiritual richness out there that
Yeah.
we've lost in the West. So I think no, I think it's brilliant what you do. Absolutely, well
Yeah.
done.
Yeah, you said that really well. And in Bali, so Bali is 90% Hindu. So, and it's specifically Balinese Hindu. So it's a little twist on Hindu, but more or less the same. It's more, and the twist is that it's a different manifestation of their many gods, and they manifest here a little bit differently. But that is exactly what the difference is. Here's the spiritual nature of the people and the reverence and the gratitude they give in some of their offerings on a daily basis, like a daily meditation where they bring, the god of fertility, the god of the harvest. It's all different representations of the same God, and you see that in how the disposition of how they are. The guy who, everything is delivered here on a bike, and the guy who delivers the coffee or whoever, he has a smile on his face, like genuinely happy. You're not faking it. And then he's, says
Mm.
in Balinese here, thank you, or, is sama sama, like just thank you, sama sama, like smile on his face every time, almost every time. And it's kind of awe inspiring to see how they live like that. And some of them are making, well below poverty level compared to Western society, what they make a year, but yet they're so happy. And it's
Yeah.
wild to see that juxtaposition of, Western society versus this society here.
Well, we're all trying to blow ourselves to bits at the moment over here, aren't
Exactly. Yeah, that's something on the military side of it's interesting of, forever wars, and where because I was, and I'm like probably like you too, is that I was at the time was like I wanted to kill bad guys, I want to go to war. That was what I was thinking. I'm like, and I was protect my country. But now it's kind of like the hindsight much quicker today is like, well, who was I protecting my country? It was like who was I serving? A lot more question of
Mm.
the nature of what is happening. And I think that's a big part of why a lot of veterans commit suicide, because they kind of have this really quick hindsight with this information, this incredible amount of data, and they see maybe, whoa, I guess I wasn't doing what I thought I was doing, I wasn't protecting anybody. I had my ego and purpose was tied to the Marine Corps or to the military, and now I'm out and it's gone, and I don't have a purpose or mission anymore. Yeah, what did you do? You think similarly, or what do you think?
Yeah, but I think when you go back to people leaving and they've got that loss of purpose, that's one thing I experienced when I left, because the military is very good at training you for what they want you to do, and it's very good at building
Indeed.
that camaraderie and identifying yourself with the badge you wear and the medals you have and everything else. And you're, I say this not in a disrespectful way, but in a way it sets you up for failure later on in life if you don't deal with it. And
Exactly.
this is evidence of this is people committing suicide, ex-service people committing suicide all the time. And I think when we look at the conflict, it's primarily westernized. We got the whole issue with Ukraine and everything else going on over there, which is very, very sad. But it all hinges on this point of separation. So when people leave, they're separated from who they think they were, and that causes the suffering. But the point you made just now, which is a really profound one, actually, was who are people actually fighting for? Why? What's the real agenda? Because it doesn't make any sense. We've had more wars since the end of the Second World War than has ever happened before. In not only destroying people, it's destroying the planet. That's the bad thing. The planet will survive. Humanity may not, but the planet will survive. I'm very
Yep.
faithful of that. But I think what you found there in Bali is, I think, it's missing from the West. That reverence, that spirituality, that family atmosphere, if that's the right way to put it out there. Everyone serves everyone else, irrespective of what they earn. Whereas over here, it's, go and buy the next expensive car because my neighbour's got a new car, I'll buy it. In fact, my neighbour got shocked the other day because I've said I'm going to sell my Jag. And he said, why? I said, I don't need it. He said, but it's a beautiful car. I said, yeah, but I don't use it. I walk everywhere now. And I'm
Yeah.
not doing 52,000 miles a year. And he said, you can't sell it. And I said, why? He said, you won't have a car. I said, my wife's got a car. We're going to share a car. That this part of letting go and not being caught up in a materialistic thing is something
Yeah.
that's really been liberating for me. And I think what you've done for your family, especially your young children, I think will really reap some good fruit.
I believe so too. Thank you.
Right, my friend. I'm going to love you and leave you. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Yes, sir. Thank you. The pleasure is all mine. Thank you so much. Till next time, sir.